where does this love of music come from? And is there an earliest musical memory that comes to you now?
I think like with most people, it comes from being exposed to music just while I was growing up in my house. Um, More so just in terms of records that were played. Both my parents loved, and still love, 60s rock and roll. And as as time progressed, they would often get into sort of the latest like cool thing, through the 80s when I was born and on into the 90s. I feel like they, were introducing me to things, at, 7 years old. My dad was a huge Nirvana fan and has remained one ever since. And he's always been a huge Frank Zappa fan, Rolling Stones, going back to the 60s Beatles. Um, so there a seed was definitely planted there. But maybe one of the real drivers of my interest in making music, and not just appreciating it, was my grandfather, who showed me his music, and which I also fell in love with. He was a huge fan of Johnny Cash, and other country music from that era, but also big band music, Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw, Bix Beiderbecke, um, and going even further back, like marching band music, which I loved. And I think he caught on to the fact that I was pretty intrigued in this stuff. And so for a certain stretch of my childhood, a visit to his place would mean making mixtapes, where he would fire up his turntable, and we would choose a song to record to a tape so that I could take it and we could play it in like my parents' car on my drive home, or for the next few weeks until I saw him again. And interspersed with each song, he had a little microphone set up. So he would do like a little DJ act and would do actually little interviews with me, asking me what I liked about the song we just recorded to the tape. And I would answer, and often it would be, for the marching music, I'd be, marching around his living room. For the Johnny Cash stuff, I would be, trying to figure out the words, and so on and so forth, to sort of, gain an understanding of what it meant to like talk about music and appreciate it and get your hands dirty with it a little bit.
Did your grandpa have a DJ name while he was making these mixtapes?
No, you know
DJ
what?
Gramps?
I wish. Yeah, you know what? Maybe he's still going. He's 93 years old, and I think next time I see him, I have to tell him I realized, hey, I just realized what your DJ name should be. I'm not sure what I'm going to tell him yet, but I think that's a nice topic of conversation for the next time I go.
Can we take a moment to acknowledge your dad and your grandpa's exquisite taste in music? I mean, all those artists you named are pretty amazing. You could have been brought up on terrible music, but no. The
Yeah,
uh the
well,
rock and roll god smiled in your favor with your parents and your grandparents.
I think that stuff is great, and I think yeah, I also think it gave me an appreciation for some essential quality that all good stuff has. Hopefully a quality that transcends genre, that has more to do with expression. A song's ability to express something successfully, as opposed to a certain tone being either cool or not cool. Because big band stuff is like, unrelentingly just like joyful for the most part. Whereas, the Rolling Stones are sort of sour and sardonic, vastly different tones, but still equally successful in expressing what they set out to express.
So your dad, your grandpa, your mom, they got you into listening to music and appreciating music and loving music.
Mhm.
How do you transition from just someone that enjoys music to actually picking up an instrument? I assume guitar is your first instrument, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, no, actually. So this is where my paternal grandfather comes in. The DJ granddad was my mom's, on my mom's side. My dad's dad was a violin player, and he gave me a violin when I was, I think, 5. So that was my first instrument, and I played it for 7 years. I did the classical regimented sort of learning approach to violin, learned how to read music, learned music theory. Got to the point where I could play in the house as a little kid and nobody was running for cover because of how terrible it sounded. um, and did like little competitions and stuff, sort of as, just part of when you're, uh, you know, if when you have a certain teacher and they think you're good, they sign you up for these things and you go and play in churches alongside tons of other kids, and you sort of gain a confidence playing on stage and in front of people, that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And then of course when I turned 12, or I guess 12 or 13, um, I, to my great discredit, thought the violin wasn't cool and wanted to play guitar instead. So I switched to guitar, and unfortunately don't pick up the violin very much anymore. But you know, I have to credit, yeah, that my other granddad for getting me into the violin as a player himself, and for maybe you know encouraging my parents to like sign me up for lessons by giving us an instrument I could use.
So guitar kicks in around 12 years old. Is it later on that the singing, that the songwriting comes in?
It's actually kind of right away. It's always been interwoven with my interest in the guitar. Um, it's really fun to learn to play solos, copying blues records, as a teenager, is one of the most exciting feelings I can remember ever having. And like, bending notes and doing things like Eric Clapton, on his Cream records, or, Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan. You feel like an absolute god when you first learn to copy other guys' solos, and that's really fun. But yeah, sort of going back to the goal of a song. I've always had this urge to like use the guitar as one piece of the puzzle, in tandem, with lyrics, with written words, to like put together an entire picture, put together a whole message, and that took place pretty much right away. I was writing little songs and recording them. Obviously I knew how to use the tape deck. I'd been doing it for years with my granddad. So I would record little songs on like a Fisher Price tape deck, little microphone, to just get little song ideas down onto tape pretty much right away. And they they were rudimentary and like extremely dramatic. you know like stories of like, I don't know, superheroes doing stuff that I was into, or like little songs about the family dog, um, or like Christmas songs that I thought were super clever, doing like a blues version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer that I thought was so clever. But still, that gives you practice, and it sort of doesn't matter what you're writing about, even at any given time, even to this day. Um, my feeling is that as long as you're doing it, something you really like is going to come along at some point.
Do you think the experience with your grandpa using the tape recorder, do you think that planted the seed for eventually becoming an audio engineer and a producer? Like that, do you think that's like the starting of that thread that led to where your focus is now?
I think so, definitely. I looked up to him so much that I feel like maybe interwoven in my enjoyment of being a producer has to do with how much I got as a little kid out of him, curating these mixtapes for me and with me. And just the level of excitement that goes along with the discovery of new music, and the sort of capturing it in a way. Even though we weren't making our own songs, we were making our own mixtapes. We were making our own playlists, and that's not too different, from recording your own song. Every song comes with its own influences, and you're just trying to capture um your own blend of those influences as an artist. And there's something similar to that in making a playlist, in literally peppering your own influences just as a full sequence, as opposed to like sort of meshing them in and hiding them into a single song. And I think there's an absolute kinship there, and um, I think that experience has stuck with me and given me a lot of enjoyment out of what I do now.
And in which ways do you think that growing up in Manotick shaped you as a person and eventually as a musician? So my experience, growing up in Russell, back then it was population maybe 3,000, and now it's 30,000. It's really grown, but I feel like the small towns, there's a certain quality there that shapes who you are as a person.
I think so, definitely. First of all, there's not a lot to do, so you have to make up your own fun. Also, growing up in the suburbs usually means you have a little more space. Kids have a garage or a basement where they can get together, and not bother their parents too much with the noise that they're making. There was also like a pretty accessible little punk scene, which I think is common for a lot of suburbs across North America. You know, accessible because it just takes place in the community center, and you don't and it's not hidden from view. It's happening in a way that's obvious to everyone. And also they need acts. So if you have a little band in a little suburban town, and there's a punk show happening a month from now, your chances of actually playing exist. It's a small time situation, and kids are going to go one way or the other. But a small town promoter needs bands, and if you have a little band and you're 14, you actually have a chance to get on stage and play. And those were the first, I would say, like real shows that I did, playing those little punk shows in Manitoba.
And did you play in a few different bands before what would eventually become Hollerado? And if so, do you remember any of the band names? Our listeners love hearing these ridiculous early band names.
Oh man, for sure. Yeah, punk. I was in two or three little punk bands through like middle school, so grades 6, 7, 8, and then high school, grades 9 to 12, and then for the first couple of years in university college before we started Hollerado. I don't remember all the names. I remember one was called None of the Above, and we won a battle of the bands because everybody voted on the bands, and our name was at the bottom, and everybody voted for None of the Above for which bands should win.
That's
uh,
genius.
Having no memory whatsoever of the fact that that was our band name. But hey, else you take the wins that you can get as a musician, and we took that one.
That was an important one to add to your
Yeah,
bio at the
yeah, my
start.
resume.